Start a talk by really just polling the audience. And how many of y'all are reasonably familiar with Khan Academy? Probably. Oh, okay. This is a very. How many of you have no idea what Khan Academy is? Okay, a few. Okay, good. Well, I'll talk to y'all. So as was introduced, and often, and probably for a lot of y'all who are familiar with Khan Academy, we tend to get associated with these YouTube lessons, and that is part of what we do. But what we're going to talk about over the next several minutes is we think that that's just the beginning, that there's much, much more to Khan Academy than just videos. But to get everyone on the same page, I will start with the montage just so we can see what those videos look like. Turn the sound up.
Usually is a capital sigma. All of these interactions are just due to the gravity over interstellar, or almost you could call it intergalactic. This animal's fossils are only found in this area of South America, a nice clean band here. Notice this is an aldehyde and it's an alcohol. Is there 30 million plus the $20 million from the American manufacturer. They create the Committee of Public Safety, which sounds like a very nice committee.
This is not Eve.
No, Botticelli's portrayed the ancient goddess of love.
This is 6 times 6 times 6, or 216.
I'm told the humidity makes it feel hotter. Why is this?
Excellent question, LeBron.
I'll define my function up here and call it calc total donuts.
Play with the pendulum and get a feel for how it moves.
If this does not blow your mind, then you have no emotion.
I always know which audiences will appreciate Euler's identity, which you guys. So just to give a snapshot of where we are now, and we just and some of these were kind of covered in the introduction. We're now reaching pretty much someone in almost every country is using Khan Academy to different degrees, and we'll talk more about that later on. Actually, we just crossed 200,000 educators are using us in some way, shape, or form. 10 million monthly unique users, and that's kind of growing fairly fast. This time last year was about 5 million. And we've had over 1.5 billion exercises done, and we'll talk in a few minutes about what an exercise is on Khan Academy. So before I go into all of that, let me, and some of it was in the introduction. It seems like a lot of y'all are reasonably familiar with what we're doing. I will take a step back and just talk about how all this happened, because I think it informs maybe where we're going to a certain degree. As was introduced, 2004, almost exactly 10 years ago, I was a year out of business school. I had just gotten married, and I was based in Boston. And I had some of my family from New Orleans was visiting me in Boston. I also grew up in New Orleans, and it was my aunt, uncle, and their 3 children, Nadia, Arman, and Ali. And Nadia was 12 years old at the time, and it just came out of conversation that she had been placed after she took a placement exam at the end of 6th grade, she was being placed into a slower math track in 7th grade. And I don't think her parents fully appreciated what that meant. They hadn't been educated in the American school system. So I told her mom, I was like, this is actually a pretty big deal. It'll kind of have her a year behind as she goes through. She won't be able to take calculus when she's in high school, and that could have implications for college and all the rest. And so her mom got a little concerned, said, well, you should talk to Nadia. And so when Nadia comes into the room, I said, what's going on? And Nadia said, well, I've been A minus B plus student for most of the time. I try my best, but on that placement exam, there was unit conversion, and I just can't get unit conversion. Kilometers to miles, ounces to gallon, that type of thing. And so I told her, I was like, well, I'm confident you could do this. So how about when you go back to New Orleans, we'll get on the phone every night, and maybe if we could figure out some way on the internet to see each other's writing, we can do a remote tutoring session. So she agreed. They go back to New Orleans, so this is August of 2004. And so every day after school for her, after work for me, we got on the phone. We eventually, Yahoo Instant Messenger at the time had this little doodle function where you could kind of scrawl things, and I started working with her. And long story short, into the beginning was a little rough. She had completely psyched herself out, was convinced that she just wasn't good at math. But after a few weeks, she started to engage a little bit better, and then she frankly caught up with her where she needed to be, and then even got a little bit ahead of where you would expect a 7th grade student to be. And at that point, I became what I call a tiger cousin. And so I called up her school, and I said, I really think Nadia Rahman should retake that placement exam from last year. They said, who are you? I said, I'm her cousin. Somewhat surprisingly, they did, and she kind of passed with flying colors. Not only did she get placed into the normal track, she went into the advanced math track. And that same Nadia, who at age 12 was convinced she couldn't get unit conversion, who was being placed in a remedial math class, 2 years later, at age 14, when she's a ninth grader, she was taking calculus at the local university. So that kind of got me intrigued as, like, this is how special was this circumstance? I just enjoyed it, being able to connect with my cousin. So I started working with her younger brothers. And then, as was introduced, a couple of things happened over the next 18 months or so. The first was my boss. It was a very small firm. It was me and my boss. And his wife became a professor at Stanford Law School. And so we moved the firm out here. We were based right here on Sand Hill Road. And so that's how me and my family ended up here. And the other things that had happened is I started, when word got around in the family that free tutoring was going on. And so I found myself, as was introduced, with 10, 15 cousins, family, friends all over the country every day after work. And to help deal with that, the one thing that I saw consistently amongst all of my cousins and family friends was that even the really good students had all sorts of gaps in their math foundations. Even if they were an A student in algebra, they were a little bit shaky on exponents, or a little bit shaky on dividing decimals or fractions or negative numbers or whatever else. And the weaker students had a lot of these gaps. And so I started writing this software to give them as much practice as possible so that I, as their tutor, could look at the data and see how much time are they spending, what are they missing, what are they getting. And so that was the first incarnation of the Khan Academy. It was just this purely software thing. But then in 2006, so I based out here, I was having a dinner at a friend's house up here in San Mateo, and he said, well, and I was showing off all the software that I was making for my family, and my friend, his name's Zuli, I have to give him full credit, he said, this is neat, but how are you scaling your actual sessions with your cousins? And I said, frankly, I'm not. It's a lot harder to do with 10 or 15 cousins than what I did with 1, 2, or 3 cousins. And he said, well, I have an idea. Well, why don't you make some of your lessons as videos and upload them onto YouTube? And I immediately said, no, that's a horrible idea. YouTube is for cats playing piano. It is not for serious mathematics. But I went home that weekend, got over the idea that it wasn't my idea. And then I decided to give it a shot. And those first few videos were in very basic pre-algebra, algebra concepts, these little 5-minute, 10-minute things. But I started to tell my cousins, look, why don't you, if you have any difficulty in anything, this is a resource for you. If you want to learn a new concept, why don't you watch the video first? And then our sessions could be more productive. You can go deeper. We can ask questions, whatever else. So I started doing that. I made probably 20 or 30 videos. I worked with my cousins in this way for about a month, and I asked them what they thought. And they somewhat backhandedly and famously told me that they liked me better on YouTube than in person. And what I'm pretty sure they were saying is they definitely appreciated having me, their kind of live human being cousin in their life. They appreciated me mentoring them and guiding them and motivating them. But when they were getting exposed to material, it was really valuable to have this on-demand thing. Not only was it on demand whenever they needed it, but it had no judgment with it. If you're a ninth grader and you're a little bit weak on dividing decimals that you should have learned in 4th or 5th grade, you don't have to be embarrassed because you have to admit it to your cousin or someone else. You can just review that when you need it. And so I took that as kind of a, hey, there's something here. So I just kept making more and more videos. And they were just up on YouTube. They were public. And then it soon became clear that people who were not my cousins were watching. And at first, there would just be some comments that would start showing up under the videos. As simple as, thank you, this really helped. And even that was a pretty big deal. I don't know how much time any of y'all have spent on YouTube. Most of the comments are not thank you. They're a little. So I just kept going. You fast forward to 2009. I had probably made, at that point, almost 1,000 videos, everything from basic arithmetic through calculus. I had even done a bunch on economics and finance. I was 2008 was an interesting period where actually I just started reading the Federal Reserve Act over and over again, and I just started making videos about what I understood. And by 2009, there was about 100,000 people using the site on a regular basis, on a monthly basis. And so, I frankly had trouble focusing on my day job. I just felt like there was something really unique going on here. But I never really viewed it as a business. This was always kind of a passion of mine, and I was just getting kind of just joy out of doing it. So I had set it up as a not-for-profit in 2008. Once again, not thinking that this was going to be my life a year later, but in 2009, my wife and I sat down. We had a little bit of savings, and we kind of came to the conclusion that it looks like there's something here. Why don't I kind of give it my all for a year and figure out if we can find someone to support this as a not-for-profit. And I think any time you start anything, any entrepreneurial story, it almost always starts with a little bit of naivete. I have trouble saying the word. You always have to be a little bit optimistic, and I think I was probably in that same bucket. I was kind of like, well, the social return on investment here is kind of off the charts. An unlimited number of people could use these resources. The math or the science, it's really evergreen content. It could be used 50 years from now. And so I quit my job and tried to get this thing off the ground. And long story short, a few months go by. I talked to a bunch of foundations, and it was just a strange thing. It was a one-man NGO that was kind of this tech YouTube software thing. Wasn't a traditional not-for-profit, and I frankly, I didn't get much traction. Fast forward 9 months. I was getting pretty insecure at this point. I even found myself updating my resume, and it was right around then, I had little PayPal donations, and people were donating $5, $10, $20 at a time, and if it was any of you, thank you. But all of a sudden, a $10,000 donation comes in. And so I see who it is. Her name is Ann Doer, and the address was there, and she's based in Palo Alto, so I immediately write her back. I say, thank you so much for this incredibly generous donation. This is the largest donation that Khan Academy has ever received. If we were a physical school, you would now have a building named after you. And Anne immediately responds back, says, oh, well, I've been using the site with my daughter. I've been using it myself to look at some of the economics and finance content. I'd love to learn more about what you're doing. So we literally met in downtown Palo Alto about 3 days later at an Indian buffet. And Anne asks, what's your goal here? And I told her, look, when you fill out the paperwork to be a not-for-profit, they ask you mission. And I've filled out a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And Anne said, well, that's ambitious. How do you see yourself doing that? And I told her, I was like, this is a mission. I don't think this is something that I'm just going to be able to accomplish by next year, check off, and move on to, say, healthcare. But I think we can make a lot of progress towards that mission, and so I showed her kind of what I was working on. Obviously she knew about the videos, and I was showing her the growth numbers of the videos. But I pointed out to her, I don't think it's just videos. We have to create interactive software. I showed her that software I'd written for my cousins. I showed her the tools that I was using as a tutor. I was saying maybe we can make a way for people to eventually connect with each other as well, get practice, get feedback, even do projects, simulations, have portfolios online. And Anne said, somewhat surprisingly, you're making a lot of progress with it seems like very few resources. I have one question. How are you supporting yourself? And in as proud of a way as possible, I said, I'm not. and so I think Anne kind of processed that, and we parted ways. And it was literally about 10 minutes later, I'm driving into my driveway in Mountain View, and I get a text message from Anne, and it said, you really need to be supporting yourself. I've just wired you $100,000. So that was a good day. And it was just the start of I guess more and more good days or more and more surreal events A month later, me and a buddy were running a little summer program at a middle school in Portola Valley. And it was really just this idea, we'd been doing this for a couple of years with our vacation time, that, okay, now virtually you can get all these exercises, you could get on-demand video, but what could a physical classroom how could that be used now if it's not about lecture, if it's not about reviewing your homework? And so it was really a summer camp around simulations and games and Socratic dialogue. And we were in the middle of one simulation where we had 6 kids, 6 seventh graders playing a game of Risk. And then the other 20 were trading securities based on the outcome of that game of Risk. A very good game. And while that was happening, I start getting some text messages from Anne, which you could imagine I now take very seriously. And they were fairly disjointed, but they read along the lines of, I'm at the Aspen Ideas Festival, I'm in the main pavilion, Bill Gates on stage with Walter Isaacson, last 5 minutes talking about you. And I didn't really know what to make of this, so I immediately boot the nearest 7th grader off of a computer, and I start looking for some validation of this thing that Anne seems to be referring to. And in about 20 or so minutes, I found the video footage of the event. Literally, Walter Isaacson asks Bill Gates, what are you excited about? And Bill just starts saying, well, there's this new site called Khan Academy. I use it with my kids. I use it myself. And you could imagine what was going on through my head. At one, obviously this was exciting. This was kind of surreal. But it also made me a little nervous. Those videos were for Nadia, not Bill Gates. And frankly, when I went home, obviously a lot of people actually started emailing me, did you hear about this? And I obviously told my wife, I told everyone I knew. But then it was, what do I do now? Do I call him? I'm assuming he's not listed. And so they left me in that limbo state for about 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, I'm about to record a video in literally, I was based in a walk-in closet in our bedroom. And the cell phone rings. It's a Seattle number. Hello? This is Larry Cohen. I'm Bill Gates' chief of staff. You might have heard that Bill's a fan. Yeah, I heard that. And we'd love to fly you up to Seattle in the near future if you have some time. And I was looking at my calendar for the month, completely blank. And so I said, yeah, maybe Wednesday I got to do some laundry, cut my nails, but I think I can meet Bill Gates. So flew up, had a meeting very similar to the meeting with Anne. At around the exact same time, some folks from Google reached out and said, well, what would you do with more resources? I told them the same exact thing. And so by fall of 2010, we had the support initially from Google and the Gates Foundation, and since then met many other folks, to really kind of start in a real way and build an organization. And what we immediately started investing in was those software tools that I started working on for my cousins. And what I have right over here, we're looking at right over here, that's what we call our knowledge map. And I show that because that's probably the best representation of how we're approaching, especially things like mathematics. We could talk later about how we might approach things more on the humanities side of things. But the idea here is each of those circles are a concept in mathematics. At the top of it, you have basic arithmetic, and as you go further and further down, you get into more advanced arithmetic, middle school math, high school math, and right now that knowledge map goes up down to college level calculus. And the videos, as you saw, go much further than this knowledge map, but our goal is for these exercises, and I'll show you what they look like in a second, to be just as comprehensive over time. And the model is as a student shows proficiency in, say, basic addition, as they show they've really mastered it, it will then move them to the next level, say basic subtraction or level 2 addition. And on a lot of levels, that's common sense. That's the way a video game would work. A video game, you beat level 1, you try as much as you need to beat level 1, then you go to level 2. It's the way a martial art works. You take the white belt exam as many times as you need to, and then once you've really mastered it, then you become a yellow belt. It's the way that you would learn a musical instrument. But what we point out is, it's not the way that a traditional academic model works. A traditional academic model, and really this is the academic model of maybe the last 200 years, is let's group students together, usually by age, and then we will move them at a set pace. Usually it's a kind of a dictated pacing, a dictated curriculum. And the tempo of the classroom goes something like the teacher reviews last night's homework, then gives a lecture. Then the students go home, they do the homework, they come back the next day, they do review homework a little bit, they get another lecture. That continues for a few weeks, and then there's an exam. And on that exam, let's say the current unit is exponents. So let's say on that exam, I get an 80%, you get a 90%, you get a 95%. Maybe there's some kids in the classroom who fail the exam. They get a 50%. And even though that exam identified those weaknesses, those gaps, even the A student, what was that 5% they didn't know? And especially the student who failed it, what was that 50% they didn't know? Even though they identify those weaknesses, the class then moves on to the next concept. Say negative exponents or logarithms, somehow expecting that magically the student who got an 80% on basic exponents will be able to really navigate logarithms. And to kind of put into focus on some level how absurd this is, imagine if we did other things in our life that way. Say home building. So you bring the contractor in and you say, well, we've been told that we have 3 weeks to build the foundation. Do what you can. And so the contractor does what they can. Maybe it rains, maybe some of the workers fall sick, maybe some of the supplies don't show up. 3 weeks later, the inspector comes, and well, you know, the concrete's still wet over there, that part's not quite up to code. I'd give it a 80%. So great, that's a C, let's build the first floor. Same exact thing. You tell the contractor, we have 2 weeks, do what you can. Inspector comes in after 2 weeks, 75%. Okay, that's a C minus, D plus. Let's build the second floor, third floor, fourth floor. Then all of a sudden, when the fourth floor, while they're working on it, it collapses. If our reaction to that is our reaction in kind of the education system, we'll say, oh, well, the contractor we need a better contractor, or we need more inspection. And who knows, maybe that was part of it. But the really absurd thing is, what was the process? We were artificially constraining how long we had to do something. And then when we identified gaps, we just ignored them, and then we built on top of those gaps. So what we believe is, instead of holding fixed when and how long someone learns something, and the variable is how well they learn it, so that's the traditional A, B, C, D, F, it should be the other way around. What's fixed is that you should expect every student to get to a high level of at least proficiency, if not mastery, of, say, basic exponents. And what's variable is how long they have to learn it and when they actually learn the concepts. This is just some screenshots of what the site looks like. If you were to go to the site today, you'll kind of be asked to take a little pretest, and the system is really building a kind of a statistical model of what the student knows and doesn't know, and then it's trying to recommend what's the next best thing for them. And if it starts to feel that there's gaps in that student's knowledge, it will try to rewind them back to make sure that those gaps are covered. And those tiles that you see at the top of that screen right over there, we call that our dashboard. Each of those squares represent one of those concepts in mathematics, and the depth of blue is the system's best understanding of how well the student understands those concepts. And then we give those reports to the student themselves, obviously, but also to the parents and teachers and anyone else. This is an example of what an exercise looks like. I like to show this. Not all of them are as visual or as, I guess, manipulative in a virtual sense as this one, but I like to show this because it shows where we're going. It shows that you can do things in this form factor that you couldn't have done with a traditional textbook or even a traditional chalkboard. This shows, there's a lot of game mechanics on the site. We're really trying to use what people have learned in the video gaming world to really get that same, I guess you could call it a healthy addictiveness, if we're talking about mathematics. One of the things that has been really interesting, even when I first pitched Anne and the Gates Foundation and Google, I said, this is first and foremost a user-facing tool, something that's going to hopefully allow students to meet students where they are and allow them to build their math foundations and go as far as they want to go. But it also has some interesting research implications. Even in 2009, 100,000 or so people were using the site a month. Now we've grown 100-fold since then. That we have 10 million people using the site every month. They're doing 5 million exercises every day. And so we can actually start running experiments at a scale that people have never been able to run before. In web speak, A/B experiment, A/B tests. A/B tests are things, Amazon.com might say, someone at Amazon would say, well, maybe we should change the purchase button to buy this. And so, well, let's test it. We'll have 5% of our population see the buy this button, and we'll measure how many of the transactions get converted. And now we can do the exact same thing, run the same type of A/B test, but it's much more around how did that affect the students' retention, how does that affect their engagement on the site. And this is just one of the experiments that we've run in the last year. It's actually based on some research from Carol Dweck, who's based here at Stanford, around growth mindsets. How many of y'all are familiar with growth mindset type of, okay, a few of y'all. It's interesting, it's actually an interesting thing just as a parent to think about, or even as a manager. It's this idea that we tend to praise people on their innate ability. Oh wow, that's a good job, you're really good at this, you're really smart, you're really talented. But her research shows is that could have a dark side when you do that, because if you're always praising people on their innate ability, if they start to engage in something where they don't feel innately strong, their temptation might be to disengage from it because they don't want to look like they're not talented. And so what she's found is if you actually praise people on their perseverance, their grit, their effort, that tends to lead to more engagement. People are going to be more perseverant. And so we tried to test that on our site. And so we just put these little growth mindset quotes on the top of problems as students were doing it. And it could have very well hurt them, because this is another thing they had to look at, another thing they had to read. But we actually saw a 4% increase in the number of problems done. And 4%, and this is over hundreds of thousands, so very statistically significant. And it's interesting that 4%, but what's really exciting is we get 4% here, 4% there. We hope over time, over really the next few decades, we can really get orders of magnitude higher levels of engagement and retention for students. This is a dashboard in classrooms. When all of this started, this was kind of a supplementary thing. But then some classrooms started to reach out and said, well, how would you use this inside, say, a fifth grade math classroom? And we said, well, look, we don't see that you have to lecture to students all at the same pace anymore. Instead, every student can go at their own pace, master concepts before moving on, and that the classroom should really be about engaging with each other, not just with the teacher, but also with one's peers. And so this was what one of the dashboards that a teacher might have looks like. Each row there is a student in the class. Each column there is one of those concepts that you saw on that original knowledge map. And the depth of blue is how well the student seems to be getting it. And red is the system flagging it for the teacher that student seems to be stuck. And so the teacher can go to that student, it's Maureen's having trouble with multiplying decimals. The teacher could either do a very focused intervention with Maureen and let everyone else continue to work at their own pace, or even better, get one of those other students, Marcia there has already mastered it, get Marcia to tutor Maureen and also get the benefit of learning to explain the material. This is some data from a local charter school, Oakland Unity. And I stress the Peter McIntosh part, because I don't want to give anyone the impression that you can just drop ship Khan Academy into a classroom and all of a sudden the butterflies will fly and the flowers will bloom. It is really a tool when used in the classroom that is going to be as effective as the person using the tool. And Peter McIntosh, in my mind, is probably one of the most effective teachers at using Khan Academy. He'd always craved to move to a kind of more self-directed, personalized world, but he never had the tools to do it. And just to show that just him as a teacher, he was able to get this classroom, this cohort of 9th grade algebra students. In 2010, they were in the 20th percentile of California. They were coming out of the Oakland public school system. Just with kind of his teaching effort, no fancy technology, he was able to get them to the 76th percentile, but then he felt like they were asymptoting. And that's when he introduced Khan Academy, and they are now in the 99th percentile in California. There's actually only 9 9th grade algebra classes that are outperforming this 9th grade algebra class that's in a charter school in Oakland. And what's interesting about what he tells us is, obviously, he's using it in a math classroom. It's a math tool right now, but he doesn't view it like that. He views it as a mindset changing tool. That what he's observed is that his students, they come in passive, they come in disengaged, they come in essentially telling the teacher, tell me what to do next, tell me what to learn, I'm not good at this. And by using a tool that promotes self-direction, that promotes owning your own path, and taking resources to help you reach your goals, it changes their mindset. It makes them more self-directed. It gives them agency over their learning. And in his mind, that's what's really driving the scores. And that they're seeing that effect not just in the math class, but then they're seeing that effect throughout those students' lives and in everything they do. And just to give a sense, this is kind of the classroom use case, but still 90% of our users, about 1 million of our users every month are in classrooms. Still 9 million are just random people outside of classrooms. This next video kind of reminds us of just how many people there are out there who have a ton of potential and just need the tools to tap into them.
So I actually dropped out of high school twice, both during my freshman year. And when I eventually came back, I was put in sort of lower level math and science classes because I was so behind. Then I discovered Khan Academy, and I was able to skip 2 years worth of math just through using the site. And I came into school, I took the exam with students who had been enrolled in the class all year, and I was actually able to get the highest or the second highest scores in the class. So for me, Khan Academy really changed the trajectory of my entire life, because without it, I don't think I ever really would have been inspired to learn and to love math and to love science. I ended up graduating as a valedictorian and going on to Princeton, where I'm now a computer science major, and I'm absolutely passionate about learning about computers, about math, about science. And without Khan Academy, I don't think that these things would really matter to me the way that they do today. So I'd just like to say a massive thank you to everyone at Khan Academy, Sal and the team. Please keep doing the good work that you're doing, because you're really changing lives.
When we saw that, and he's a computer science major, we said, we have internships. And he applied, and actually, so many of the people who interviewed him didn't know that he'd kind of sent in this testimonial, but they came to him and he's like, this one Princeton student is just amazing. We actually had never seen every round he got a strong hire, which, is a fairly strong statement, especially to get it from 4 people in a row. And I said, well, why are you surprised that he's so good? We educated him. We should. But yeah, he's actually going to come work for us this summer. So we're solving our own labor problem. So that's very exciting. So something that some of y'all might have been thinking about is, well, everything I've talked about so far is essentially the world we live in, the developed world, the English-speaking world. What about the rest of the planet? And all of these pictures are pictures of Khan Academy being used in essentially the rest of the planet. And it's not us doing it, it's other NGOs, other groups taking our content, putting it on computers, setting up computer labs, setting up internet connections, and taking them oftentimes into remote villages. And all of these are exciting stories in their own right. Probably the craziest one is the one on the top right. I used to give talks like this and say, who knows, maybe one day this will be used in Mongolia. Just trying to think of the furthest place on the planet. Then a few months later, I get a letter from Mongolia, from the young woman in the top right there. Her name is Zaya, and she sent a YouTube link. I immediately click on that. It was very similar to kind of Charlie's, hey, I like Khan Academy, it's really helped me, et cetera, et cetera. I said, well, that's great. I assume she must be a upper middle class young woman. Her English was quite good. She had access to a computer and the internet. But then I read the email a little bit closer. It turned out that there was a group of volunteers, engineers at Cisco Systems, who were using their vacation time to go to Asia and set up computer labs in orphanages. And they set up computer labs in Zaya's orphanage. And what you see in the top right are those orphan girls using Khan Academy. And so that was, still kind of tops one of the more surreal events that, or letters or testimonials that we've gotten. And since then, partnering with foundations around the world, we started to think much more seriously about localizing and internationalizing our content. So we've launched a completely Spanish version of Khan Academy recently. So all of the exercises, everything in Spanish, Brazilian Portuguese we've launched recently, French, Turkish coming soon, and our goal is to do really all of the world's major languages. And just to get a sense of what these look like, I'll show you these next few slides.
Sí decimos que bueno, esta fue la primera cara y esta fue la segunda cara.
तो ये जो है जो ऑब्जर्वर यहाँ कहीं बैठा होगा तो उसको ये इमेज जो है
那个角就是正弦数值对应的角。
Мы можем обе стороны разделить на b plus a.
Également sur la dernière leçon.
שהנקודה בשאלה. אז למעשה זה רק השינוי בערך y.
و سنگریزه رو ما اگه بدیم به نونوایی چیزی
এখন দুই কার্বন যুক্ত অ্যাসিটাইল কোয়ে উৎপন্ন হয়
Auf der Zahlengerade zeichnen. Hier ist meine Zahlengerade.
Mas é claro que ele fez muitas e muitas e muitas outras coisas importantes.
I'm Zaya from Mongolia. Your videos are so interesting and funny. Make more lessons.
This is, oh. This is what the site looks like in Spanish. And you know, an interest, it's es.khanacademy.org. And what's fun is, even it has implications even for the US. Even in the same classroom, you could have all of the students working in English, but if some student has a language barrier, they could operate in Spanish and the teacher and do the exact same skills, the exact same problems really, and the teacher can get the dashboard to kind of compare apples to apples. So at least that student's language barrier shouldn't necessarily hold them back in mathematics. So original tagline there was just the necessities. He's got a computer and a bell. That's the so, you know, big picture, and this is something that I tell, you know, all the stakeholders in Khan Academy all the time. I tell this to the team, I tell this to our supporters, I tell this to all of our volunteers, and we've had, you know, we're still a relatively small team, about 60 people, but we've had 14,000 people volunteer for us in some way, help subtitle videos, translate videos, do outreach into villages or local schools. And what I tell all of them is, you know, this isn't, you know, people often say a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I say, you know, I think this is bigger than that. I think this is a once in a millennium opportunity where we are at an inflection point. We're definitely at an inflection point, and I'd argue it's a bigger inflection point than any time in history, especially because the speed at which it's happening. Even if we think about, you know, people sometimes talk about printing press moments, but the printing press, it was still 100 years between when the printing press was invented and you have your first newspaper. Here, the things are happening 1,000 times faster, and so and the implications are going to be, I think, even larger than something like the printing press. And anytime you have these inflection points, it's you know, and it was delusional when I thought this way when I was literally operating out of a walk-in closet. But one of the reasons why I set this up as a not-for-profit is I said, well, maybe, just maybe, we have this inflection point. Every inflection point needs new institutions that essentially take advantage of the inflection point to serve the needs, the opportunities and the problems we're going to face. And so what I'm excited about is I genuinely think that over the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years, we'll be able to take this thing called education that has always been scarce, that has always been the key determinant between the haves and the have-nots, and like clean drinking water or basic shelter, get a lot closer to making it a fundamental human right. Thank you.
So you've basically cost me a job because I'm supposed to lighten things up at this conference, and that's not going to be possible following you. And so we have time for a few questions. One question I've got, go back to your initial videos. Once people get through the basics, what do you find are the 2 or 3 most popular things that people look for in your website?
Yeah, you know, I mean, you know, our most popular stuff is some of the introductory videos into some of the concepts you can imagine a lot of students having difficulty with: trigonometry, calculus, actually a lot of economics, linear algebra. You know, there's a lot of content there. But what's more surprising is we actually have a lot of usage of the, I would say, for lack of a word, the finance content: credit default swaps, mortgage-backed securities. These are. There was a, you know,
I didn't know that was going to be the answer.
Yeah, well, you know, in 2008, I was an analyst at a hedge fund, and I found that a lot of the junior analysts that we were bringing on, you know, very smart individuals, summa cum laude from some of the best universities, but they did lack some of the basics, you know, even just basic understanding accounting or understanding backlog or any of these types of things. And then also, especially once the financial crisis, or even before the financial crisis hit, frankly, a lot of people were confused about things like, mortgage-backed securities. And so I started making videos on it. And I remember in October of 2008, I actually got an email from a gentleman. I won't say from what firm he worked at, but he said, "Thank you so much for the video on mortgage-backed securities. I now know what I do for a living." So it was a very, I thought it was
Okay. Well, raise your hand, and then there are people with microphones who will come to you. And there are theoretical people with microphones. She's right behind you, the microphone.
For the inspiring talk, and it's amazing to hear the story of how you've democratized education and brought it to so many people. I've dabbled in online education myself. I did a MOOC at Stanford on finance, and a couple things, questions I had for you. The learning tools you've developed and the way that you've revolutionized the classroom experience is just inspiring and amazing. And one question I had for you was how you think that leaves the lecture or the video lecture, because one experience I had was it was really hard to get the students that I was doing flipped classroom stuff with to actually watch the videos in the same way that it was hard in the past to get students to read textbooks. So that was the first question. Then the second question was whether you have any thoughts on what can be done with or for students whose engagement with computers is, maybe not the same as kind of your average kind of math and science teched up person, because one does observe with children there's kind of a range of ways that they engage with computers. One could say, well, look, engaging with computers is just like reading now. I mean, you have to engage with computers to be able to function in society. But there do seem to be some differences there among children. So those are the two questions I had. Thank you so much for
great questions. This is the interesting, and this is coming from someone who's made 3,000 videos or something. I actually don't view the videos as the focal point. I mean, even on day one, I view those as like, well, maybe, I already have this exercise platform, and that's kind of where the learning happens, by doing kind of, deep practice and challenging yourself continuously and getting feedback on it. But yeah, maybe on-demand explanations might help as well, just in case. And, the funny thing is, even though we kind of got on the radar through these videos, and these videos were students, having an exam the next day and just like, I really don't get, the chain rule in calculus. I need to figure it out, and they'll find it, and they'll say, hey, that worked, and they'll tell their friend about it. We still see the meat of the learning in kind of the practice, the feedback part of it. And so, what I say, and I wrote this a little bit in my book, is this whole lecture thing. When we make the lecture the focal point of the classroom, it feels good, because I think from the lecturer's point of view, they feel like, okay, I at least covered the material, and those people were looking at me while I did it, so I assume something registered. But I think, when any of us we remember sitting in, lecture halls in college, and, you're lucky to get, and I'm not, I don't want to joke too much, but you're lucky to really process about 10 minutes of it. A lot of it was you're fading in and out, you're trying to take notes to kind of just stay up, maybe you'll review it later. So I think the reality is that lecture has always been something that people don't really get a lot of. And I've always thought about, why is the lecture, especially at the university level, 60, 90 minutes, and it's really just logistics. It's literally, okay, it takes some overhead to get people into a room at a certain time, this many people, and then I think literally the calculation is, how long can we keep them there without a mutiny, without people having to use the restroom or whatever else? And that's where the 90 minutes came from. And so I think on-demand, kind of bite-sized videos, exactly what you need they are valuable, but I don't mind if there's a classroom where a student feels no need to watch the videos, that he or she is able to kind of keep working through problems, get things wrong, fail fast, keep iterating. If, the best resource is actually going to be their peer who's going to be right next to them, say, hey man, this is how I thought about the problem, and then you have a two-way learning. So yes, I think lectures can be useful almost as a reference or as a resource, but not as this is the ritual that we do every day. In terms of computer access and how kids, that's an open question. I don't know. I mean, even as a parent, my kids are 5 and 2.5, so I also struggle with this. What's the appropriate amount of time on an iPad and all that type of thing? My general sense is, like a book or like anything, it's really what you do with it. One thing that I tell every parent is, the kids today are cursed because there's so much to consume on computers. When a lot of us were kids, computers were much more of a creative tool. There wasn't a lot to consume on it. And today it can be a very powerful creative tool, but you can get distracted very easily. But yeah, once again, it's a tool like anything else, and it depends on how you're actually using it. But that's where I think the dashboard and the reporting functionality is really important. It's actually always boggled my mind that, really frankly, the last 30 years, people have been putting out computers into classrooms and even putting it internationally in villages and things. But no one's really been tracking how is it being used, how much time is, what's the return on this fairly significant capital investment. So hopefully that'll also start allowing us to understand how to do that better.
There's a question in the back here.
I think everyone marvels at how you've put together 3,000 videos on such a variety of subjects, like each of them were something you'd done your PhD thesis on. And I'm wondering, for the folks that are translating this, are they translating your video, or and if so, are they folks who also have it couldn't be your background, but a background like yours, or are they just?
No, good question. So it is something we're figuring out, and every in every region we have a kind of a different organization that's trying to figure out how to do it. The general thing is they are, for the most, some of them they're just subtitling, sometimes they're just dubbing, but you quickly realize that there are cultural boundaries. I didn't realize it, but I say I don't want to beat a dead horse a lot in my videos, and that does not translate well into many other languages. So the ideal is them redoing the videos, and we are trying our best. So actually most of the people doing it tend to be, I guess you could say in some ways they are more specialized than I am. The economics videos are being done by economics professors in Mexico City. The math videos are being done by math teachers or math professors. So we are trying to do that, but I think the main thing that we are trying to make sure that they have is the right level of energy. One thing that I stress to everyone who makes videos is there's a very important I guess, right-brained element of this, or I guess you could say tonal element of this, which is you want to make people feel comfortable, you want them to enjoy it, they should feel the energy, the passion in your voice, and the best way to have that is to have energy and passion in your mind when you're working things through. So we're still figuring it out. I guess the good or the bad thing is, in English, I was not the first person to make educational videos online. I was probably the 1,000th person to do it. And so it was already kind of I guess you could say, a very competitive space to differentiate. But in a lot of other languages, even Spanish, but especially if you go to Arabic or Swahili or Hindi, there's very little, next to nothing. And frankly, we criticize our own classrooms a lot, but if you look at the teaching style in a lot of the rest of the world, it's even drier. It's even more kind of oppressive almost. And so we feel that let's get something out there, get it fast. Hopefully that already will create value for students, and then we'll iterate. And to some degree we have time because in a lot of other countries the internet penetration isn't as high, but in 5 or 10 years it will be. And so we'll hopefully be there with a good tool.
Okay, I'm going to exercise my prerogative as getting the last question, but we only have really time for one more quick question, and then we have to go to the next session. We're back here. Sorry.
Salman.
It's on. It was on.
You are able to hear me?
Yes.
It's Jim Breyer from Axel. Nice to see you. As you think about Coursera to high school, and then how you move up into high school, and when we think about community colleges, how are you thinking about the multitude of platforms and how they might collide, and how wonderful professors and applications developers might decide to work with the different platforms, whether it's edX or other university platforms, and how you move and address some of the needs we have in high school and community colleges? Thanks.
Yeah, no, I mean, you just hit the kind of the heart of, kind of our big picture strategic questions, which is, and for a little background on that question, we're there. In the last, I would say, about 2 years, you've had these MOOCs emerge, massively open online courses. Really started off here at Stanford, started with Sebastian Thrun, who's now started Udacity, then Coursera, 2 other professors from the computer science department here, then initially MIT and Harvard, but now many other universities have joined this kind of edX consortium, which is a not-for-profit initiative. And all of these MOOCs are really about taking high-quality university courses and essentially virtualizing them in some way. And and we know all of these folks really, really well. And we're excited because on some level, this whole ecosystem is trying to help us with our mission, which is a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. I think the differences between them, and they're really just different tacks, and I think we're all learning from each other. What the MOOCs are doing is, and it's in their name, is massively open online courses, that they are in some way still traditional courses in that you start on a certain day, you literally register them, you start on a certain day, the class kind of moves together at a semi-synchronous pace. They have exams, problem sets on a weekly basis, and at the end of it, if you're able to keep up with it, you will get a certificate of some kind that you might be able to, might have some economic value or signaling value into the marketplace or something. It has some benefits, where it has that cohort effect. The negatives of it are it is really just seeing who can keep up with one of these courses. So one way to think about it is if there's a MOOC teaching calculus, and say it's from an MIT calculus course, it's essentially who can keep up with an MIT level of calculus pacing and rigor over the course of a semester, while when we try to address calculus, it's much more of a, well, okay, your goal is calculus, but you actually are still a little bit shaky in your algebra, and actually you're a little bit shakier in your negative numbers, whatever else, so we're going to meet you where you are, and then it might take you 18 months to get to your endpoint. It might take you 3 years to get to your endpoint, but we're going to make sure you get there. But in terms of, and I think they're all, it's all mixing. I think some of the MOOCs are also starting to do a little bit more of that, where they're starting saying, okay, maybe we can back people up and fill in blanks. I think, if my guess of how this ecosystem is going to play out, well, I don't know for sure, but definitely in kind of the foundational dimension, I think you have to have this personalized, self-paced type of tool. One thing that we've always struggled with is, okay, you can learn on Khan Academy, and you have people like Charlie who learn on it, but how do they prove themselves? How do they, signal to society that they're ready for the next thing? I don't know how many of y'all saw the announcement we made with the College Board last week? And a few of y'all. Okay, so it was actually a pretty big announcement, I think, for both organizations. College Board, makers of the SAT. Last week, they announced that they are, in 2006, they're going to launch a new SAT. But from our point of view, the bigger announcement was that they're not kind of ignoring this whole test prep inequity that's been going on for decades, and we're partnering with them to essentially make the best high-quality free test prep for anyone. And it's something that they've never done before. Yes. So the big picture is, I think this will start to let us think about how if people learn on Khan Academy, they can prove it through AP tests, they can prove it through the SAT, and they can prove it through other things. So it'll start to at least complete the ecosystem a little bit.
I'm sure we could go on another 2 hours on this. I have the last question, and luckily it is you don't have to answer it. You spent more than the year on this that you said, and so when are you going to do affordable health care? What? You don't have to answer. It's a rhetorical question.
I had an answer, but else.
That was great. It was fabulous. Pitch perfect. Thank you so much.